He was Louis XIV, the Sun King, a monarch so powerful he bent aristocrats to his will and dreamed of a palace to outshine the sun itself. His obsession birthed a wonder. But this monument to absolute power began in the most unlikely of places, a mosquito-infested swamp. The 27-year-old king chose a site his courtiers found appalling. Yet, Louis had a sentimental reason. It was his father's old hunting lodge, a place of childhood memories. He wanted to preserve it, despite architectural challenges. From the outset, Louis thought big. He hired Louis le Vau, the greatest architect, to transform the modest lodge into a palace. It was an audacious challenge to nature itself. While Versailles consumed his energy, Louis balanced it with another passion: women. Despite his marriage to Queen Marie-Thérèse, his numerous affairs were no secret. Louis had tremendous enthusiasm for women, not just for pleasure, but their company, conversation, and wit. He loved how they teased him, made him laugh. His appetite for life extended to love. A French king was expected to have a mistress, a symbol of national virility. 100 years later, Louis XVI was chastised for not having one. It was a sign of the times. Louise de la Vallière was his first official mistress. A charming lady in waiting, she adored the king, genuinely. She gave him 2 children and was made a duchess, but it was a young man's crush. Louis, however, never neglected his queen. His marriage to Marie-Thérèse was a vital political alliance, securing peace with Spain and ensuring dynastic succession. He felt a profound duty towards her. He visited her frequently. After their marital duties, the queen would hold a special mass. His pleased demeanor was a source of knowing glances among the courtiers. She accepted his infidelities as customary. Like all 17th-century monarchs, Louis believed he was God's direct appointee. This divine right meant no one could tell him what to do. He was the sole power in the realm, a living god. As a living god, Louis thrived on being the center of attention. He was an accomplished dancer, his performances transforming his self-confidence, captivating his court. His golden hair and alabaster face impressed all. Dressing up was more than fun. It was part of his public image. He adopted Apollo, the Greek sun god, as his role model. The sun symbolized light, benefit, and undeniable domination. The sun was a powerful propaganda tool, showing everything else subordinate to him. This title, initially propaganda, eventually became a deeply believed reality. Le Vau's plans for Versailles were ready. Louis demanded a sensational building, one that would deliver shock and awe. But there was a major flaw. Le Vau planned to destroy the old hunting lodge. Louis insisted on preserving his father's small chateau. Architects preferred stating fresh, but the king's will was absolute. Le Vau was sent back to the drawing board, bound by this constraint. Next, the landscape. Louis envisioned ornamental lakes and dazzling fountains, but Versailles was naturally ill-suited. It was a valley, lacking views and the desired trees. André Lenotre, the century's most celebrated landscape designer, faced the greatest challenge of his career. Louis XIV demanded immediate results, no waiting for saplings to grow. The solution? Uproot mature trees from across France and transport them using special horse-drawn contraptions. This was a testament to Louis's impatience and unwavering will. With major building work on hold, Louis directed Le Vau to upgrade Versailles' interior. Louis himself often inspected the progress, accompanied by his entourage and current mistress, Louise. But Louise now faced a rival, Madame de Montespan. Louise, desperate to regain the king's attention, suffered immensely. For Louis, power was a great aphrodisiac, attracting the most beautiful women. After a war with Spain, Louis celebrated with a huge party at Versailles, displaying his power and introducing Madame de Montespan as his new favorite. She was one of France's most beautiful women. Montespan loved pleasure, jewels, clothes, food, flowers, and especially, she perfectly matched Louis's enormous gusto, becoming central to his grand entertainments. These festivities were more than mere pleasure, they carried real political significance. Louis was transforming Versailles into Europe's most important and fashionable seat of power. The parties were designed to awe the nobility and Europe, showcasing France's artistic and cultural superiority. Versailles was becoming a statement, a declaration of French dominance. Louis's former mistress, Louise, eventually gave up, entering a convent. Despite guilt over leaving the children, she sought expiation through penance, ending her life in sanctity. As Louis spent more time at Versailles, he moved his government there. Lavaux proposed the envelope design, preserving the old chateau, but enclosing it with new palace-style buildings. Building the envelope was a massive undertaking, employing up to 40,000 workers. It was also incredibly dangerous. Louis's impatience meant work continued day and night, with no health and safety regulations. The highest-risk workers, officers and carpenters, suffered many accidents. At times, the death rate was so high that bodies were secretly removed at night to avoid demoralizing the workforce. Madame de Montespan, despite being married, spent most of the time with the king, receiving VIP treatment. She had a suite of 20 lavish rooms, while the queen made do with 11. They spent many happy hours there. Montespan wasn't jealous of the queen, knowing she held Louis's true affection, but she made scenes over other mistresses. Louis, perhaps, enjoyed this display of he cared. Louis kept a close eye on the construction, but one inspection brought a nasty surprise. An angry mother, whose son died on site, confronted him directly, letting fly with her grief. Louis was astonished, asking, "Is that me?" This was a courageous act against an absolute monarch. She was quickly hustled away for punishment, but the moment was indelible. Lenot's ambitious garden plans finally took shape. His genius lay in changing the landscape on a grid, creating outdoor rooms furnished by sculptors, architects, and water engineers. Louis's ministers were installed in their new apartments, and the king began governing from Versailles. He then declared it his permanent home, insisting leading French nobles live there too. For Louis, the nobility were essential for his glory, but they were also potential rebels. By forcing them to Versailles, he could keep a close eye on them, controlling their movements and ambitions. This forced relocation meant even more building. Louis's finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, worried about the astronomical costs, but the king's will was paramount. The message to his nobles was clear: don't rebel. Instead, come and pay court. You, path to favors, military commands, and influence now lay solely through access to the king. Lavaux died before completion. His replacement, Jules Hardouin-Mansart, proposed huge wings for princes and counties. His most ambitious idea? A fabulous gallery lined with mirrors. Despite magnificent plans, the reality of construction was messy. Counties complained of dust, the smell of wet plaster, and constant noise. Versailles was a huge, active building site, not a serene palace. At night, mattresses unrolled throughout the palace for servants and guards. Lavatory arrangements were basic, leading to foul odors. Amidst outward splendor, Versailles could feel like a family. Despite the chaos, nobles compulsively desired to attend court, to be near the king. Exclusion was disastrous. Their status depended entirely on Louis's favor. Louis's desire for magnificence extended to his wardrobe. He dressed in the finest cloth, setting fashion trends. When his hair receded, he popularized elaborate wigs and, being short, high-heeled shoes. His mistresses also influenced fashion. Madame de Montespan invented the glorious déshabille, a tunic over trousers, easy to remove. Louis, impatient, appreciated this private convenience. With so many counties vying for attention, Louis ritualized his daily life. The leve, or waking ceremony, involved nobles squabbling over the honor of handing him his shirt, depending on rank. Even meal times became a performance, with nobles watching the king eat. This constant defense was a powerful signal. The monarchy was firmly in charge. Flattery was a way of life. Versailles also promoted France itself, showcasing French manufactures and rivaling Italy's taste. The interior's splendor reflected Louis XIV's claim to lead Europe in arts and taste. Louis commissioned hundreds of artworks, presenting himself as a conquering hero, drawing on mythology. This carefully orchestrated image, advised by a backup team of intellectuals, was a real innovation. Louis's public image, while hyped, reflected a remarkable man. Hunting 3 times a day, council meetings 3 times a day, making love 3 times a day, he possessed amazing energy. Yet, even the Sun King couldn't change geography. Versailles lacked enough water for its hundreds of fountains. Gardeners secretly turned them on as Louis approached, then off once he passed. The problem was never solved. Attempts, like the vast machine of Mali and a full-scale Roman aqueduct, failed or were too expensive. The great gardens never had enough water to run all fountains simultaneously. Fortunately, there was enough glass for the palace's most ambitious achievement, the Hall of Mirrors. 6 years of intense work culminated in Mansart and Lebrun's most stunning creation. The Hall of Mirrors created a dreamlike effect, an astonishing spectacle of light and life. Versailles, Louis believed, should be seen as an integrated whole, outshining every other palace ever conceived. For Louis, Versailles was the ideal theatre to act out his royal duties. It was a place for display, fulfilling the requirements for maintaining his authority and position better than any other building. Louis's love affair with Versailles lasted longer than any human relationship. After 14 years, 9 pregnancies, and 7 children, Madame de Montespan's looks, and he hold on the king, faded. She became the blousy, dank, and gambled too much, and threw tantrums. The more needy and clingy she became, the more Louis dove away. He was also undergoing a personal transformation. Louis was growing more religious. Adultery, especially with a married woman, was sacrilege. His lifestyle was compromising his kingship. He sought a very different kind of woman. He turned to Madame de Maintenon, governess to his illegitimate children. Pious, quiet, and intelligent, she possessed qualities a middle-aged Louis now admired. She became his calm presence. Slowly, Maintenon began to seduce the king with her intellect and serenity. Montespan, infuriated, realized she had underestimated this innocuous widow. Maintenon offered a different kind of allure. When the long-suffering Queen Marie-Thérèse died, Louis was free to marry. He secretly wed Maintenon, a commoner, in a morganatic wedding, satisfying his conscience while maintaining his public image as solitary. In public, Louis focused on running his palace. Court life became even more formalized, Versailles transforming into France's great social, political, and power-broking center. To a French nobleman, Versailles was thrilling. To be admitted to the king's gaming table or dance before him was enormously prestigious. It was a unique networking hub, akin to Royal Ascot and a futures exchange. But it was also a hotbed of scandal. With nobility so dependent, Louis fully immersed himself in his role. He emerged as a consummate performer, a charismatic figure around whom the entire Versailles regime hinged. But Louis was only human. After years of good health, he suffered a serious anal fistula, a life-threatening condition in the 17th century. Untreated, it would kill him. Surgery was risky, but Louis insisted. A new instrument was devised. Doctors practiced on others. The operation was performed without anesthetic. Louis, with extraordinary self-control, endured it with dignity. That very night, pale and sweating, he held a council meeting. The king's envoy, a closely guarded secret, averted diplomatic chaos across Europe. Louis recovered, but troubles loomed. His fame earned him enemies. 2 years later, France entered a costly war against Spain, England, and Sweden. The Sun King was in decline. As the fighting dragged on, Versailles silver was quietly melted down to pay soldiers. Louis signed an unfavorable peace treaty, conceding territory. His enthusiasm for the palace waned. A new crisis. The Spanish king died, leaving his empire to Louis's grandson. Accepting would mean war, refusing would empower rivals. Louis was damned if he did, damned if he didn't. Prioritizing dynastic honor, Louis accepted, provoking a grueling 12-year war that brought France to unity. Old and frail, he fell under Maintenon's devout influence. Versailles became a chilly, tedious place. Louis's life, an endless choreography of etiquette, was watched by Madame de Maintenon, a holy spider in the cone. Spontaneity was gone. Illness claimed many family members, including his son and grandson. Louis, a tragic figure in his final days, was haunted by his war's legacy, weeping in private. A very sad old age. At 76, after 72 years on the throne, Louis fell seriously ill with a gangrenous infection. Even his death became a public performance. He died slowly, with remarkable courage. Maintenon left for a convent. Louis, on his deathbed, advised his 5-year-old grandson, the future Louis XV, "I have loved war too much." Sad, true dying words. Throughout his long reign, Louis sought glory for France and himself. His devotion, expressed in Versailles, forged a sense of identity that endures. He embodied the greatness of France. But the world's most magnificent palace was about to become its most notorious. A home to decadence on a truly royal scale that would ultimately bring the monarchy to the brink of collapse. The waking ceremony of Louis XV, monarch of France and Navarre, just 11-year-old boy. He would reign for 58 years, but his life would be lived in the shadow of Louis XIV's glory. Louis XIV was an incredibly tough act to follow. The great conqueror, the first actor on the stage of Versailles, everything orbited around him. His successor faced immense pressure. Louis XV never expected to be king. Both his father and grandfather died, orphaned at 2, raised by strangers. A sickly child, he was surrounded by the legacy of his great-grandfather. On his 12th birthday, he took the crown. The coronation of Louis XV sparked great hope. After years of war, France was at peace, ready to invest all its ambitions in this young, untested king. But a shadow loomed, a mountain of debt. Louis XIV left France in dire financial states, 20 years' revenue in debt, 2 billion lives, £160 billion today, a massive problem. Before tackling the debt, another urgent matter, marriage. At 15, his 5-year-old Spanish fiancée was too young. Ministers keen for an heir dispatched him back to Madrid. They found Maja Leszczyńska, daughter of the deposed Polish king. She had no money, but at 22 was quite petty. The 15-year-old Louis fell madly in love. Royal sex lives were public property, and Louis was much discussed in Versailles corridors, though not always believed. He was now a husband, but not yet a true ruler. Louis XV decided to copy his great-grandfather, becoming his own prime minister. He felt he had to be a new Louis XIV, ruling as an absolute monarch, enjoying the hunt. The relationship stated well, a happy decade producing a string of children, 8 girls and 2 boys. Louis was fulfilling his most important royal role, fathering an heir. But after 10 years and 10 pregnancies, the Queen was fed up. She cited saints' days to avoid him. Gradually, the excuses grew more frequent, the saints more obscure, until Louis lost his temper. Louis asked his concierge, Lebel, for any woman, anything and anyone could be provided. He soon stated a life of dalliances and full-blown affairs, becoming one of history's greatest libertines. His first illicit affair was with Louise Julie de Mailly. He then proceeded to take all 4 of her equally attractive sisters as his mistresses, speaking widespread rumor and amusement. Louis's affairs with the sisters and other women produced a brood of illegitimate children, around 30. As his rooms filled, his mind turned to state affairs, following Louis XIV into war. Louis XV's decision to go to war in 1744 was hugely popular. A king of France should lead his armies. His declaration against Britain and Austria made him a hero. But he bought his first bush with death. At Metz, he fell terribly ill, doctors giving up hope. The French population was genuinely frozen with fear at the prospect of losing their king. To receive last sacraments, he had to confess, sending away his mistresses. Louis, though lax with marriage vows, feared hell and dying without absolution for his immortal soul. The king received the last rites, then miraculously recovered. From this period, his name, Louis the Well-Beloved, dates, reflecting the people's immense relief and joy. But his newfound piety didn't last. Soon he returned to his old ways. Within months, Madame de Chateau was back in his bed. Louis the Beloved became even more popular. In 1745, Louis was present at Fontenoy, where the French army crushed the Austrians and British. France was again the dominant power in Europe, echoing Louis XIV's glory. It was the perfect moment to meet the love of his life. While hunting, he came across a beautiful, striking young woman in the carriage. Everyone noticed his instant fascination. This was Jeanne Antoinette Poisson, Madame de Pompadour. More than just a piece of game, she was well connected, part of a powerful financial clique, and strikingly beautiful. As a child, a fortune teller predicted the king would fall in love with her. She used her beauty and considerable political acumen to establish herself at the heart of the king's power. She sang, danced, possessed a beautiful voice, was well-read, charming, and spiritual. Louis and Pompadour were deeply in love. Their relationship, for years, was sexually passionate. She found lovemaking physically cold, but she had to please Louis, resorting to diets of egg yolks and red wine with gold flakes. He observed she would kill herself rather than please him this way. Despite being a royal favorite, Pompadour was despised by most of Versailles. They couldn't forgive her middle-class origins, considering liaisons with lower-class prostitutes more acceptable than with an aristocrat. Ignoring the snobs, Pompadour used her charm and intelligence to advance her friends and undermine rivals. She was at the heart of a powerful court cabal, a political force. Louis's children loathed her, believing her presence demeaned their father and that she spent fortunes. They famously dubbed her Madame Poisson, or Madame Fish, a cruel play on her maiden name. Ironically, the Queen was at the impression by Pompadour's kindness. Pompadour was the first to send her flowers. The queen was heard to say, "If there must be a mistress, better that it is this one." Victorious in war and lucky in love, Louis grew overconfident. He agreed to a peace deal with Austria, returning most of his generals' conquests. His ministers were appalled. The French public, having spent millions and lost countless men, couldn't understand. Louis's popularity waned. School children and fishwives joked, "You're as stupid as the peace." As his love affair with Pompadour cooled, Louis established a private harem in Versailles, known as the Deer Park. His sexual appetite was now satisfied by a series of young women from Paris. These were often teenage, uneducated girls, many unaware of their powerful love. The press, however, amplified this, making him an absolute sexual debauchee of the worst kind. The D-Pack fueled rumors of terrible orgies. Pompadour was falsely accused of acting as a procuress, finding girls for Louis. She knew about it, but accepted it as a necessity. Ironically, Pompadour's influence grew after their sexual relationship ended. She became his trusted friend, almost the only person at court he could rely on amidst intrigue and pretense. As top power broker, Pompadour delved into government. While clever, she didn't understand politics. Louis foolishly entrusted her as a go-between with the Austrian ambassador, who easily manipulated her. This new alliance with Austria was detested. Counties with long-term loyalties were shocked to find France allied with its traditional enemy. Criticism of Louis and Pompadour escalated. Livid pamphlets and vile poems attacked his physique, accusing him of sexual diseases and procuring girls. These were left in Versailles, possibly by his own family members. One pamphlet threatened the king with death, invoking Ravaillac, Henry IV's assassin. For the first time, calls for the king's killing appeared in public discourse. Rumors spread that Louis's police kidnapped children so he could bathe in their blood to cure a horrible illness. This deeply shocking rumor illustrated the public's hatred. Diplomacy, intended to bring peace, instead led to the 7 Years' War against Britain and Prussia. News from the front was bad. Parisians even danced in the streets to celebrate French defeats. In 1757, as Louis XV descended the steps to his carriage, a man named Damiens rushed up and stabbed him. Louis felt blood, identified the assailant, and Damiens was immediately arrested. Damien was tortured to ascertain accomplices and if the knife was poisoned. Louis XV, despite his suffering, did not want him tortured. He took this amateurish attempt on his life very badly. It was a flesh wound, but it had a disproportionate effect. Louis XV fell into a deep depression, convinced he had become the well-hated instead of the well-beloved. Damiens was executed with extreme cruelty in Paris. Bones broken, flesh burned and torn, dismembered by horses. He remained conscious for 4 hours of torment. Reports disgusted people across Europe. The execution stained Louis XV's reputation, giving his reign a ghastly backward feeling. His mental stability was shattered. Aides described him as troubled and depressed, a melancholic king. To make matters worse, the conflict with Britain was disastrous. France lost Canada, India, and much of the Caribbean. The British Navy turned the tables. France lost its global superpower pretensions. For a king hoping to emulate Louis XIV's glory, this was almost unbearable. He withdrew, hiding at Versailles, spending his time hunting or with the girls in the Deep Park. When criticism grew too much, Louis responded with absolutist measures. He ordered the French encyclopedia, a great intellectual achievement, to be burned, suspicious of anything unorthodox. Still close to Pompadour, she subtly swayed his mind. At a dinner, she inquired about gunpowder, lamenting the banned encyclopedia. Louis, intrigued by a borrowed copy, eventually reinstated it. This was one of Pompadour's last contributions. In 1764, she contracted tuberculosis and was shifted from Versailles. Louis, seeing her carriage leave, wept. He had lost his most trusted confidant. His death was followed by his son, the Dauphin, in 1765, and the Queen in 1768. These deaths, close together, deeply impacted him, stating the worst period of his life. He spent days lost in introspection or discussing with philosophers and astronomers. Withdrawn, depressive, and obsessed with death, his melancholic tendencies were evident. Just as counties gave up hope, Louis regained his lust for life. The reason? A new mistress, Madame Dubé, nearly 40 years his junior, beautiful, fun, and fabulously sexy, she revitalized the aging king. She was the 18th century tat with a heat, a debauched angel. Dubé, a kept woman, had learned tricks that delighted the 60-year-old Louis, benefiting his mental health. But Dubé was loathed. Parisians hated him for not being aristocratic, aristocrats for his streetwalker origins. Louis XV was seen as increasingly dissolute beneath the dignity of a king. Despite criticism, Louis embarked on a grand project, a new theatre inside Versailles for his grandson, the future Louis XVI's wedding. He wanted a spectacular ceremony to assert monarchical splendor. Politicians grumbled about the crippling costs of the royal wedding, but Louis kept spending. He was also confronting the parliaments, the high courts that challenged his authority. In 1770, Louis decided to abolish the parliaments, a flagrant abuse of royal power. It was a coup d'état, threatening the monarchy's self-image as a legitimate absolute rule according to law. Louis believed he was acting in France's best interest, reforming an outdated legal system. He introduced free justice and crown-appointed judges, reforms Voltaire lauded as enlightened. But by silencing the parliaments, the king unleashed opposition on a scale not seen for generations. It was too late for Louis to play the reformer. Towards the end of his reign, Louis XV was sunk in vice. His reforms faltered. His mistress was uncourtly. On Easter Sunday, 1774, the Abbé de Beauvais delivered a devastating sermon, a direct attack on the king's morality. After this humiliation, Louis XV fell ill. Doctors struggled to diagnose, then saw familiar blotches, smallpox. It was a killer disease, and he had the black variety, disfiguring his face. His enemies spread rumors he caught it from a prostitute, fueling the idea of a corrupt body reflecting a corrupt king. This was seen as a fitting punishment, an outward sign of inward damnation. Underneath it all, Louis was devout. He sent away Madame Dubé, received the last rites, and faced his final days with considerable courage, dying like Louis XIV. When he died, no one seemed to care. Counties stampeded, abandoning his chamber, clutching their noses from the stench. His body was sealed in an iron coffin. News of his death brought celebration. There was general belief. The well-beloved was gone. The population had lost all hope in their king. Many argue the monarchy could never recover from the dispute engendered by Louis XV. For over a century, Versailles was Europe's most powerful family's home, artistic, lavish, scandalous. But outside its gilded gates, millions starved, taxed to the hilt, while nobles paid nothing. A new king, Louis XVI, and his beautiful young queen, Marie Antoinette, faced the biggest challenge in their family's history, being faint or lose their palace, crowns, and heads. In 1775, Versailles celebrated a new coronation. Louis XVI, just 20, felt unready, as did his young Austrian wife. Yet, the public had high hopes for this new, glorious reign. Louis XVI wanted to rule in the grand manner, like Louis XIV, as an absolute monarch. But crucially, he also wanted to be popular, to govern in the interest of all his people. He called himself Louis the Philanthropic. One of his first decisions justified his counties, inoculating his entire family against smallpox using an experimental, dangerous procedure. He led by example. In public, they seemed happy. But behind the smiles, a big problem. The royal marriage was a disaster. Louis XVI could not, or would not, consummate it. A king and queen's sex life was a matter of state. News of Louis's failings spread quickly through Versailles. Courtiers hung about, asking, "How was it for you, sir?" Nothing happened for a long time. Given his predecessor's legendary exploits, Louis XVI's innocence seemed extraordinary. Historians debate if it was ignorance or a medical condition, phimosis, causing pain. His hunting diary suggests it wasn't an operation. While Louis struggled with marital duties, he addressed the nation's finances. He hired Anne Robert Jacques Turgot, one of Europe's sharpest minds, a wealthy minister with a modern outlook. France still remembered terrible famines. Turgot, focused on landed wealth and taxation, tried to teach the king lessons about life outside Versailles, like the price of bread. Louis was interested, others not so much. Louis's enthusiasm for modernizing adventurous policies was strong. He hoped to reform France and regain its status as Europe's leading power, a promising start to his reign. But most counties, including Louis's relatives, resisted. Turgot's reforms meant they'd pay taxes for the first time. Versailles became an isolated world, oblivious to France's political issues. Nobles paid no poll tax. Louis XVI saw this as wrong, aiming to end it. But Turgot's proposals threatened society's traditional structure, where nobles and clergy held privileged positions. Opposition came from within the council. Conservative men like Louis's brother, the Comte de Provence. Queen Marie Antoinette, hearing salon gossip, also opposed Turgot. Louis XVI was torn. Economists were divided. The very survival of the French state was at stake. Momentous decisions for a young man. He initially stood firm, but his confidence wavered. Louis lacked the will to support Turgot to the bitter end. He eventually dismissed him, reportedly saying, "Monsieur Turgot wants to be me. I don't want him to be me." The minister was disgraced. The first attempt to confront the nobility ended in failure. Louis looked weak and indecisive, labels that would stick throughout his reign. But after 8 years, Louis and Marie Antoinette finally had children, a daughter, then an heir. The Dauphin's birth was a miracle. Paris erupted in celebration, fountains flowed with wine. Louis enjoyed being a father and, for a while, being king. But the burdens of government weighed heavily, especially the urgent need to fill the national treasury. Louis's next attempt, Jacques Necker, one of Europe's wealthiest men, a Genevan banker. France, deep in financial trouble, found his personal credit advantageous. He was seen as a miracle man. France's old enemy, England, struggled with an armed rebellion in its American colonies. Louis XVI, desperate for revenge for the 7 Years' War, wanted to support the insurgents. But supporting insurgents, many of them Republicans, troubled Louis. They took a middle course, covertly sending weapons and arms to help the Americans fight the British. This assistance cost a fortune. Necker arranged emergency loans. The world's first democratic revolution was financed by one of Europe's least democratic nations, a fact that troubled Louis. Louis's investment paid off with the American victory at Saratoga. He decided to publicly support America and declare war on Britain. He threw a huge party at Versailles for Benjamin Franklin. Nobles ignored Franklin's democratic beliefs. They simply relished the chance to undermine hated England. Franklin, living in France, became an instant celebrity, inspiring Franklin mania. Neck, already deep in debt, struggled to control royal spending. War was expensive, and France's political system couldn't tax the rich. This was the fundamental problem of the French state. After several years, Necker, having exhausted borrowing options, proposed raising taxes. He published plans to get rid of unnecessary but lucrative court jobs. A familiar argument erupted. Louis promised to back Necker, just as he had Turgot. He wanted to be strong this time, but once again he began to dither. He was not a decisive man by nature. Despite his wife's advice, Louis decided Necker had to go. The second attempt to confront the French nobility ended like the first, in complete failure. When Britain recognized American independence, Louis achieved a famous victory. But counties whispered, France had financed the war on borrowed money, receiving little economic benefit. The war's impact on French finances was terrible. One observer said, "The first gunshot will drive the state to bankruptcy." They were only wrong by a few years. Neck's successor, Charles Alexandre de Calonne, proposed a new, counterintuitive idea. To boost the French economy, Louis should spend even more. Marie Antoinette, once popular, was now Madame Deficit, a symbol of aristocratic selfishness. Salacious pamphlets attacked her, depicting wild sex lives and dragging the monarchy down. Pamphlets accused him of affairs, even transmitting venereal disease. These gossip, lewd, and illustrated attacks made current celebrity scandals seem mild. Louis himself was a victim of pamphlet writers. From what he had read, Louis assumed the county despised him. But a visit to Normandy to inspect a new pot brought a pleasant surprise. He was incredibly popular, something he was utterly unsuspecting of. Returning to court, he remarked, "I know I'm getting near to Versailles because cheeses are much weaker." Calonne now proposed cuts and new taxes for the nobility, echoing his ill-fated predecessors. The nobles organized to resist. Louis believed Calonne's medicine could save France, but doubted the patient would swallow it. This time, Louis had to support his minister to the bitter end. The assembly of notables, powerful figures, were asked to vote away their own privileges. It became an absolute bear garden, a dogfight. Asking turkeys to vote early for Christmas, they inevitably ejected it. Calonne was sacked. Louis, tapped between economic disaster and implacable opponents, couldn't cope. He suffered a mental breakdown, stumbling through his palace, tormented by visions. Like his grandfather, Louis XVI entered a deep depression. This crisis moment questioned his ability to be king. Tearful, indecisive, reliant on Marie Antoinette, he exhibited alarming lapses of reason. To wowen matters, someone sneaked a portrait of England's executed King Charles I into his private chamber. Louis, who knew Charles's story well, was terrified. But Louis, with his mechanical mind, reasoned, "If I avoid Charles's mistakes, I won't be executed." He wouldn't levy war on his subjects. He tried one last time, calling an unprecedented Estates General. In August 1788, the treasury was bare. The Estates General was the last throw of the dice. But the Third Estate, representing 27.5 million people, had votes equal to the privileged 500,000. A political deadlock. A difficult time worsened with the death of their eldest son. This psychological shock drew the king and his nobility close. It was a crucial moment. Louis, always surrounded by nobles, swayed towards supporting their interests. Marie Antoinette also leaned that way. He found it difficult to distance himself from the world he knew at Versailles. With negotiations hopelessly bogged down, the Third Estate sought Louis's help at Versailles. He refused to meet them. It was the final straw. The Third Estate took matters into its own hands, declaring itself the National Assembly. This was evolutionary, a representative body claiming power based on a democratic principle, demanding a constitution. Faced with the crumbling old regime, Louis XVI resorted to force, assembling troops around Paris. Parisians, panicking over rapidly rising food prices, decided to defend themselves. As a result, they attacked the Bastille, not just a prison, but a symbol of royal tyranny, to get the powder. Louis was woken in the middle of the night with the news. Louis XVI had a choice: risk civil war or refuse to fight his own people. He knew his English history. He would not repeat Charles I's mistake. He would not raise his standard against his subjects. But many now wanted to go to war with him. 3 months after the Bastille, an angry Parisian crowd marched on Versailles itself, vowing to kill Marie Antoinette, the symbol of hated aristocratic excess. Marie Antoinette was the main target. The mob broke in early morning, killing a bodyguard. The Queen narrowly escaped to the King's chamber, a terrifying moment for the royal family. The King, Queen, and children appeared on the balcony, showing themselves as prisoners. They surrendered to the evolutionary crowd, agreeing to be taken to Paris. None would ever see Versailles again. They were taken back to Paris, labeled the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's son, a grim reference to the bread crisis. After October 6th, they were truly prisoners of the revolution. Louis had tried and failed to change his kingdom. Now he would pay the price. Both he and Marie Antoinette would die under the blade of the guillotine. For over a century, Versailles embodied the Bourbon dynasty's power and prestige, but it also represented a society fundamentally unfair and corrupt, glittering yet grotesquely unequal, magnificent yet profoundly immoral. A society whose time was up. Versailles, the golden cage, ultimately tapped the very dynasty it was built to glorify.